Hi.
Ready?
Hey everyone, long time no see.
Right. Get up, pet the dog, go to the next meeting.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. If we're lucky, this is everybody and we're done. All right, cool. Don't worry, it's root beer.
Hey, no judgment here.
I had somebody in an actual work meeting that was like, "Are you drinking alcohol?" I was like, "Oh."
I kind of hit the Balmer Peak.
I mean, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
What kind of root beer is it?
Some kind of crafted root beer. I like it because I don't like regular root beer. I don't know. I don't like it. But the stuff where they kind of try to homebrew it the old style, it has a lot more complexity to the taste.
Oh yeah, yeah. There are some really good varieties of brands of root beer beyond the Barks, Mugs, A&W.
Yeah. Like A&W is just carbonation with dirt mixed in or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there have been some pretty good ones I've had. There's this one that's surprisingly good. It's the XXX root beer.
I gotta confess, I forgot about this meeting because I got super focused on my work. And so my alarm goes off. It's like, you have 10 minutes until your doc's working group meeting. I'm like, oh, that's a thing. Yeah. I gotta stop what I'm doing. Sent me a root beer product.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's
Oh.
the most recent one I've had that is like really good.
So you're a root beer connoisseur.
Maybe. Although now that I think about it, yeah, that's probably fair to say. I was a teenager and I had a ranking of which root beers, like just common grocery store root beers, you could get, and what they're, how good they were both chilled and not chilled. Mug root beer is the most consistent. Like it ranks kind of the same whether it's cold or not. IBC root beer, like if it's not cold, it's not good at all. And then of course you get stuff like, Walmart brand and it's your grocery store specifics that are just like, yeah, whatever. But yeah.
For anyone that joined late, this is no longer the documentation working group. It's the root beer working group.
All right. Has anyone started recording?
Yes, it's recording. I think it's set to record automatically.
Oh, great. Okay, so we start this off. Right. Okay.
And that does remind me. So I am going to be taking over the uploading of the work group meetings onto YouTube. My goal is going to be to have those up by the Monday following the work group meeting.
Cool.
So those will be posted with a description and available for the meeting.
All right. Well, my plan for this meeting was to go over our guidelines, so that way it's recorded and again up on YouTube, so when people get interest, they can see that. Explain what we're aiming to work on in a general way, and then kind of look at how we have I've set up the project board to facilitate that, and then we can introduce each other and all that. And finally, at the end of that, we'll discuss more in depth the problems that we're all interested in.
Okay. Can you link to that, please?
Yes. I'll put it in the documentation Slack.
Awesome.
All right, may I share screen? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously this is a documentation working group. What we're focused on, talking with Alyssa Rock, with Sage, who will be here shortly. Obviously from you, Gareth, I've gotten some input, and from SaltConf 19. Kind of what people are frustrated about with our documentation is what we want to address. Things like trying to reduce the amount of time investment for users getting on board with Salt to begin with. There is a lack of documentation for the super beginner and lack of documentation for the super expert. You know, we have good road in the middle kind of documentation, and sometimes that's too much and sometimes it's not enough. And we recognize that that's always a tug and pull game. Also, the way some of the SALT documentation is set up isn't very conducive from flowing from one topic to another, or trying to connect more than one piece of SALT and trying to find documentation to show those connections. An example of that is tutorials or guides that do exist on SALT have a pretty different discipline of how they show you information from your regular module documentation that's actually there in line. Obviously, that's always going to be the case, but we can do a better job of pointing and saying this is where you need to go if you want to do X, Y, Z. Obviously, we want to redo a lot of tutorials and guidelines or guides because some of them, again, they really just were their own thing and they didn't introduce a person to buying into how SALT documentation works. And so we're going to redo that. Also from Gareth, it was brought very clearly that like we need to do some more documentation guides of like, why does this feature exist, and showing a more in-depth reason of like how you'd use it in what use case. And then finally, on a more of a feather of a hat kind of way, we wanted to start introducing some more stuff in the documentation to allow people to see code maturity. For example, we have plenty of modules in Salt. You know, we hype that we have like 100 modules, but a couple of those are dead, either because whatever they linked to went out of business or just the industry moved on from them, and we wouldn't want to encourage users to use those and then have to throw away all of their work when they realize no one else is doing that. And yeah, we'll get into that more later. Moving on to the working group contribution guidelines. I try to keep these somewhat loose because this is a open source working group. No one is required to be here, and no one is required to do any work technically. And so we have to respect that. And so I'm going to read verbatim. You are not required to be a working group member to assist in any of these goals. So if you are interested in fixing a single issue with the documentation, you're welcome to ask if you can do so and do it. You're not required to, you know, sign that you're going to be in this working group forever. You do need to be a member though to have a voice. That means that if you have a big idea and you want it ran, you can't just constantly yell for it and not contribute. You need to be part of the working group and have a record of like actually getting some work done for your ideas to be taken more seriously. This is in a sense to try to keep away from the backseat driving that can happen in coding groups. Action is emphasized, again, just restating the point. We're going to be here to do work, not just talk about it. What somebody else should do is going to be what are we going to do, and then execution. Obviously, some of these tasks are bigger than others, and so I ask that if you've agreed to take on a task, that you complete that task, and try not to take on something that you're not sure you can do, because either somebody else might have been willing to work on that task and you snapped it up, and so then they're refraining from stepping on your toes, or the fact is that you're overwhelmed and it's kind of indefinite and you don't want to participate anymore at that point because you're just too overwhelmed, and that happens, you know, burnout. We every developer here and probably even tech writers know that developing in a vacuum is horrible. And so I think documentation triples down on that, because if developers, competent developers, develop documentation for whatever they created, they tend to write it from their perspective and not from someone being introduced. We see this all over the SALT docs. We're going to address that. So I encourage that even if you're the one assigned solely to it, you ask for review and help and clarifications, both within our group and within the community in general. Finally, again, this is kind of trying to guard against the backseat driving. When we do agree to get a task done, we're going to try to do it with the tools that are already there. Even if we are looking to maybe replace a tool, I prefer to try to do so with what we have now until we've made a definitive decision to migrate from some tool. So there have been plenty of suggestions already of switching from Sphinx or jumping on to some kind of ASCII doc and all that, and all of those will be considered, but we are not going to assume that that is the solution to a half a dozen issues that we could fix now. So good faith effort in getting it done now, and then if it really can't be done, we can discuss at length and recognize that, okay, maybe the tool needs to be changed finally. Any questions on those guidelines? All right, cool. Moving on to our agenda board. So I kind of set up the documentation working group with 3 different kinds of tasks. The first 2 are give us the most autonomy from one another, which is single day tasks that could be just literally a correction in the documentation, like there's a typo, or a 404 error with a hyperlink, something simple. One person can do it. You get that done, that's fine. Solo single day tasks, solo long-term tasks are like creating a new guide. You might need a few weeks to work on that. That's recognized, but you don't need a full team working on it. And so those are my intention is to have the solo single day tasks be something kind of like a tax for our group to the community. All of us are going to be taking a task for ourselves. We'll work on that and get that done. And in a sense, that's the way to show to the community that we're productive and that you should allow us to work on those bigger projects and those bigger ideas that we have, because we're getting the little things done too. Same thing with the solo long-term tasks. I don't really consider them a tax. It's more like those are things that are needed and somebody just needs to get it done, such as some of the topics that beginners would want are kind of really lacking or just confusing. And so, a rework would take time, but when done would be immensely appreciated. And then finally, the multi-person and just multi-person tasks are the more bigger projects. Those are the ones that we're all have lofty goals to complete, whether those are large migrations or introducing the module health ideas that I mentioned offhand. Those kind of ideas, those aren't represented here because they have to be talked about and agreed upon before I create those boards for them. Those will obviously have multiple issues and multiple tasks for each project. Any questions so far? Okay. Well then, moving on. With all that introduction and all that, let's introduce ourselves. And what the 3 things I'd like to hear is SALT, how much SALT you know, how much front-end development you have, and tech writing skills. And then obviously throw on a good hobby or who you work for or whatever you're interested in sharing. I'll go first. I'm Alan Kugler. I work for Terminal Labs. We're partners with SaltStack and we really enjoy SALT. I've been using it for a few years and it's pretty good. I have limited front-end experience. I have enough to where I can get code working and done, but I really don't have the flair for making it look pretty. Tech writing wise, I'm good at giving objective tech writing, but I'm bad at tutorials. I tend to get too stuck on all the details and trying to perfect it too much. So I'm good for like module explanation, but not walkthroughs. And I like to swing dance and drink root beer.
I'll go next if you want, Ellen. So I'm Elisa Rock. I'm sorry that my microphone wasn't working on my computer, so I had to log in through the conference room. I am a technical writer for SaltStack. And so I have a pretty strong background in writing, of course, and just general technical writing principles. When it comes to front-end development, I'm actually not too bad. I don't know JavaScript or things like that. But when it comes to graphic design and HTML and CSS, that's the kind of stuff I really enjoy. So I'm really good at the design element. Sometimes translating that design into front-end work can be a little bit tricky, but I can do it. It just takes me a little bit longer than, say, a front-end developer might do. You mentioned tutorials. I really enjoy writing tutorials too. My main problem when it comes to tutorials, and I've written so many of them, but my main problem is just coming up with the initial idea for what it's going to teach, like what the project is going to be. But once I have that idea, I can usually translate that into a tutorial pretty effectively. So if somebody has an idea that you want me to translate into a tutorial, that would be a really good partnership. And then in addition to that, mostly I spend my time singing. I sing in some choirs. I'm the president of a choir. I do opera mostly on the side. So that's a little bit about me.
All right, I'll go. I am Cassandra Ferris. I am the community manager at SaltStack. I'm about 3 months into this gig and doing a lot of trying to help the community feel like they have more of a voice, take all of y'all's requests and get some meetups in place, get work groups in place, and just kind of help translate between business and community and developers. I was a tech recruiter for a long time, so I speak business, I speak tech, and I speak people. Development-wise, I know about this much JavaScript. I've dabbled in it, but I'm not a full-time programmer. I've not done any technical writing. I'm just here kind of to listen, observe. I do feel like over time, this would be a work group that I can contribute to because I can write in general. So it's something that I may wind up doing in the future, but not right now. And for fun, I'm into soccer. Columbus Crew is my home team. I run a geek tailgate, so I have about 25 fellow tech professionals that tailgate for our home games, and I'm into board games, and I have a corgi named Katie who likes to lay on my lap during meetings. That's it.
Go.
All right. Yeah, I'll go. How about that? Yeah, I'm Ken Kroll. I'm a production support engineer for SaltStack. I used to use Salt Open a lot back in my days of being a DevOps engineer. So I sort of long ago had that experience of being moving from a beginner to an intermediate to a relative expert Salt user and sort of finding the problems. Yeah, running into obstacles with the documentation as it was about 5 years ago, but a lot of things for how the docs were 5 years ago still apply today. I'm not a front-end developer. Probably most of my skills with that have been in terms of being a DevOps engineer and helping with build and release of things like that. I've spent I haven't used documentation tools in particular, but I've supported lots of different tools over the years. So it might be a possible thing to get involved in if we do end up moving to other things or helping automate things, who knows. And as far as tech writing, I'm certainly not a professional tech writer. As in my role as a production support engineer, I spend a lot of time writing essentially clear explanations to our customers of what their problem is and how to solve it. So I sort of have that practical tech writing experience. And yeah, for fun, I try to bicycle a lot when I'm not getting hurt or sick. And I'm a competitive crossword solver as well.
I can go. I'm Wayne Werner. Also work for SaltStack. Looks like most of us do. But yeah, I'm a Python expert and a writing enthusiast. I've been working with Python for probably about 2 years, maybe 3, longer than I was aware of SaltStack's existence. Was introduced to Salt at Python Arkansas conference. Somebody gave a little tutorial and was like, Masters Minions, that sounds pretty cool. I was in, I guess I had just graduated from college at that point. And yeah, picked up Salt, started using it. And 90% of the time, I'd say, I discovered that it was easier for me to figure out what the module is supposed to be doing by reading the code than reading the documentation. So I would just skip right, find with some module that looked like it was what I wanted to do, and then just jump right into the document or the code to figure out what exactly it was supposed to be doing. And you know, so the documentation has improved quite a bit since then. But yeah, definitely places where it just goes like, but why? Yeah. So there's that. And then on the other side, I'm a husband and father of 5 kids, so that keeps me busy most of the time. Hobbies tend to be related to that, but I do enjoy everything. I'm a fan of Adam Savage's phrase, the jack of all trade, but master of none, and more often better than master of one. So I like to know a little bit about just about everything. I've done things from throwing knives to making whips to cycling to running to I used to go to a gym. Recently for Christmas, I got a pretty nice remote control car. So yeah, I do woodworking. We're just spent a week working on our house trying to get that ready to sell. So if you can do it and it's somewhat creative, if I have not done it, I'm probably interested to do it.
All right, I'll go. So I'm Gareth Greenaway. I'm also a employee of SaltStack. So I'm a developer on the open team. Yeah, so my interest in this group was, as Alan said, I had raised the issue of like a lot of people I ended up talking to about Salt have used it or are interested in using it, but don't know how it would fit into their kind of day-to-day lives. Like our documentation is really good as long as you know what you're looking for. And when you know you have an idea of how you want to use something. Where it falls short, and as I've discovered in a lot of my conversations, is people look at the stuff and they don't know how they would use it to do what they want to do. So that's my main interest. And where I'm excited to see things go with this particular group. So my interests outside of work are primarily pet related these days. My wife and I have a plethora of pets of varying varieties. Sometimes you will see 1 or 2 of them on camera during meetings. The cats like to bother me while I'm working if I'm not paying attention to them. So don't be surprised if you see a cat jump into camera view at some point.
As cats do.
Bryce, Sage, either of you like to give your bit?
I can go. I'm an SRE here at SaltStack. Mostly maintain all of the pipelines for open and things related to that. So my purpose in participating in the documentation stuff is I run the pipelines that build it. So I want to know what the plans are so I can build appropriately.
And Bryce likes to, have a beer once in a while. That's his other thing.
Yep.
They can just pull one thing out.
I forgot about Bryce. Yeah, so I'm Sage. I wear a variety of hats. I am a Scrum Master and a Project Manager and a Release Manager, and I don't know what else. My
Pet herder in chief.
yeah, I order cheese, you know. So my degree is actually in technical writing. Turns out I'm not very good at that, but I have an interest, obviously, and I definitely think that we need some help, and so I have an interest to just help and make sure that things get seen through. So use whatever talents I've got to make sure that happens. In my spare time, which I don't really have any of that, I actually love to crochet. That's me.
All right then. And for anyone that watches this on YouTube or is later on interested, this was expected. We were expecting most of us to be all salt stack, and I encourage people that are not salt stack thinking about joining to do so, and just simply look at the number of resources willing to listen there from salt stack about our ideas and hopes for improving the documentation for the Open Salt project. So usually this meeting will be intended to be once a month is what I'd like to aim for, maybe twice a month, primarily because I'd like to give us, each of us, maybe not this meeting specifically, but during our regular meetings, I'd like to give us one short-term task, solo task, and then one long-term task to work over for a month or two, depending on whatever it is. And then in between these meetings, we're having long SCP-like discussions on whatever bigger group project that we're thinking about playing with. For Sage and Bryce, I think maybe in one of these future meetings, I'd actually like you to give us a small little spiel about how it all works on the back end from the code to getting it on the website. That would also just be helpful, I think, for a lot of the people that, again, are interested in the documentation, but not quite sure what the process is. I know I have a few questions, but we can schedule that at a later date. As far as that goes, it's basically everything for introductions. If we still have time and are interested, I'd like to just bring up some of the ideas that were brought up by the community, by SaltStack members, by myself, and just so that people can maybe get excited about some of those ideas. Sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. And feel free to tell me they're horrible or good ideas or whatever. It helps. Okay, so one of them was already accepted, and that was finished already because of Sage. That was just simply to add more labels for what the documentation requires and needs specifically on issues in the Open Salt repo. And we've already begun to use that to create issues here in our repository to give to people to do. So thank you for that, Sage. So the main things I wanted to bring up were that need some discussion is the web scraper bot for 404 errors. Obviously, documentation is we try to keep that as automated as possible because it's too hard to try to manually do everything. And one of those I realized probably a year and a half ago was that while I was just looking for problems in documentation, I was just finding huge amounts of 404 errors for links, not to other SALT stuff, just to like exterior projects that those were related to. And I was like, you just need a scraper bot to go and check each link and then throw up an issue if it doesn't work. Tom, when I presented this to him, he said that there's most definitely got to be a scraper bot out there that we can just use. We probably shouldn't have to build one. And I agree with that if it's possible.
And there may even be, I swear I recall reading about or seeing a Sphinx plugin that will do that on build. Like when you try and build the documents, it'll just do like a head request on all the links and make sure that they exist. I could be wrong, but it seems like a strange thing to not exist at this point, honestly.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of things with Sphinx that we're not currently using. And as you look down here, he's like convert Sphinx documentation into a multiple resource source. So some of that is also like, so are we going to use that or not? And so.
Right. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's something we should definitely get done. I know for a fact that like there's 15 404 error links that still exist that I haven't written issues for. So, and that was a small piece of the coding that I went through. All right, cool. I'll put that in open discussion for people to comment about. I don't know if I should write an issue for it or I don't know, some kind of way for us to facilitate and document people's opinions and suggestions. Next one was Collapsible Elements. This is a big project, a lofty one. This is something that'll take time. This is my way of trying to leverage the power of front-end development to allow us to have both super beginner material for a subject and super expert at the same time. And the concept is pretty easy. It's pretty simple, is that what is displayed will be elements, right? And each element is collapsed, and depending on your settings on the client side for the user, so a small cookie, you'll have it set to always show all the beginner stuff, always show all the expert stuff, or just show the regular stuff. And so that way, if a beginner comes on, they only see the very basics of what they need, and the collapsible element's there for them to expand if they want to hear more on a specific subject or function or whatever. And then for the experts, obviously, they want the way more complicated stuff, which will just eat the whole page right up. So that needs to always be collapsed unless they want it. And this way, we're able to give both sides of our community what they want or need without degrading the overall quality of the documentation. This is, again, something that would take a long time to do and implement because we probably have hundreds of pages. And I figured that we'd probably start with the more core important stuff once we figured out we could for sure do this with the elements. And then just allow it to slowly expand. I would expect that some of the community would either be enthused enough or frustrated enough that some other piece didn't get done, that they would also write up their own super beginner or super expert on certain functions and, contribute that to OpenSalt. That's my hope anyways. So anybody think that's a horrible idea?
No, I definitely like that idea. Have you ever seen Stripe's documentation?
No.
They have some of the best documentation I've seen in my life. Just the way it's organized and written, and it's so clear with like examples for literally everything that you want to do. And that's one of the things I think Gareth has kind of brought that up, at least from the other side of things, where it's like, I want to do X, but I don't know how to do that with Salt, because Salt can do it. And that's one of the challenges that, but with documentation, like if you look at it, 90% of the time, there are no examples for everything. And so you're like, okay, well, how do I do what I need to do? Because you just get like the definition, and that's it.
Yeah. And sometimes I find the definition isn't good enough because like it's defined what that is, but it hasn't shown the YAML format required for it to be like, used validly.
Yeah. So that's the thing that just is really difficult. And I think if we had better examples for like everything, right? That's a broad brush, I know, but yeah, if we had better examples for everything where it's like, okay, this is how you do style.line, for example. And I think if we started like, this is probably more of a long term, but if we start requiring more of that when people add features, that might help features be designed a little bit better. Because a lot of times people have like one use case in mind, and then what happens is like, it's just such a narrow function that it's kind of useless for anything but that one narrow use case. or
Or it could have been bundled with something else. Yeah.
yeah, I was just gonna say, or on the other side, they just make it entirely too broad, so it tries to do everything, and then it's useless at all of them. File.line.
So these are the two big projects that I wanted to put here first, because the 404 one, that should be relatively easy once agreed upon and implemented. So that should be the easier of the two. And then for the collapsible elements, if we're successful in getting that done, that will then open a large amount of free area to just make whatever you wanted to work on, in a sense, giving us more tax items to just do, and for the community to have as they please. So enabling them to just get whatever it is that they want done. Again, leave that open to discussion. So I've been already kind of tinkering and looking at the documentation code to try to see like where to go. And so far I haven't found any blockers. I don't have a perfect solution, but I haven't found any blockers to keep us from doing this. Finally, the three less, oh, actually, no, I guess one of these is pretty big too. Another thing that has come up already a couple of different times, or I'm sorry, I'm reading this wrong. So these two are the two: replace and expand beginner tutorials and create use case examples of modules and functions. This one is Gareth's baby, and then this one is Alyssa Rox's bread and butter. Not assigning them to him, just saying like these are two obvious ones that like we'll be working on for a long time, and these are pretty general statements. I think as we go on, as we're doing these, I will basically make a project for each one, and then as people mention it in Slack documentation that this one function needs a big great use case example, or this beginner tutorial doesn't exist, I'll add those in as issues to the project for us to do, and it'll just be kind of an ongoing rolling thing with no definitive end. Yeah. And then finally, the more interesting thing that I had wanted to do, and I think Sage was fine with it, and Bryce, I think you would maybe have an opinion on this, but I wanted to separate all the documentation that is not inline documentation for code into a separate repository. That would allow for us to have a faster turnover, and the open team doesn't have to worry as much about all pull requests coming in that have nothing to do with code. Basically, what we'd be doing is leveraging GitHub and allowing us to add in code that says use these sub-repositories. And by doing that, we can both pull in the open salt, and we can pull in another repository that has tutorials in it, nothing to do with actual code, just tutorials. And both of those still show up on the same website as code from Sphinx.
So would that be the whole docs tree, or just like a topics folder underneath the doc tree?
That's open to discussion. I haven't fully cemented that down yet. I realized that when I was looking at what documentation does exist, it's a bit more fragmented than I thought. I thought it was pretty clean cut, like this is inline documentation and then this is like tutorial documentation, but there's a few other things, and there's a good chance that we could probably actually grab, again, everything that isn't inline documentation and roll that all into one pile and just remove that from Salt. Because, and heading off the pass, I did think about, well, would this be an issue if in terminal people are looking at documentation, but people only look at documentation in terminal for a specific function or module they're working on, not for the tutorials or anything. So that shouldn't degrade that use case, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say, I doubt you would find anybody who's cloning the repository to look at the broader documentation. I know I don't, because it's RST, and yeah, sure, you can you can read it, but it's better to have the links and things available. The only, I guess, negative point to the trade-off is that having the documentation in the same repository like the overarching documentation, it does make it a little bit clearer when something is missing documentation. You know, you don't have to chase down another repository. That's probably the biggest downside to.
I'm not sure what do you mean? Like, are you talking about code documentation or?
Yeah. So specifically with the code for tutorials, yeah. I mean, I have no argument against that being in another repository, but for like, you know, if you look at the states or the module documentation, a lot of them are like literally just the inline documentation, but there are some, especially the larger, more popular ones that get, you know, a healthy overall bit of documentation. And with those, there will be like, you know, a section in the docs before it includes the actual module stuff.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Okay, yeah, that makes sense that we should probably look at that and find what's the best scenario then, or best way to cut that up.
Yeah. So that's really the only, I guess, counterpoint to that. But
and
I would say another mild concern that we need to think about, and I don't think this is necessarily a blocker, but we need to also keep the documentation, like we need to tag it when there's a release so that the documentation in the state that it's in for a specific release stays tied to a release.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring up that point because we have had several times in the past where we've had to update our documentation because we missed before the release. And so we've had to cut a new tag that's literally just the doc changes and, you know, effectively cut a release, even though we weren't deploying any artifacts, just the documentation. So from that point of view, having a separate repo that's not necessarily tied to the primary source code is, you know, that is actually an advantage because then it's like, okay, we're just building the documentation from this repo and, oh, we missed something, great, let's go in and fix it. And we're not worried about like, you know, any of that code sharing that's happening within this main salt repo.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll then explore that more in depth. That was one of the primary things I had wanted to accomplish in the next couple of months, to just make it easier to separate it from open salt code and make it easier for us to have quicker turnover of whatever we're deciding to work on. All right, any other comments, concerns, thoughts? When are we supposed to be done with this meeting? Like latest or whatever?
I think it ends in 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's scheduled for an hour, but obviously we don't need to take up the whole time.
Okay.
Where the conversation goes.
Then I think I would like to go ahead and schedule us to have another meeting in 2 weeks. And
Okay.
I will write up I guess an issue for each one of these. And I'll write up a project for these two, and I'll write up issues for these two for us to discuss, or these three to discuss.
So those cards, you can actually click your ellipses and turn them into an issue.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Just to give you that gives you some ease of tracking too. You can convert it.
Okay, cool. And then these are also topics that are just as interesting or more ambitious than these. But a lot of these are the big lofty ones. Therefore, there's no point listing every lofty one when we're only going to have enough time and resources to work on one at a time. So if you care to just know what maybe is on the plate to be talked about, and get excited about something you want to particularly do your own personal study on, they're here for you to read. And I encourage you to do so. And again, to anybody that's watching on YouTube or anybody on Slack that cares to peruse, the open issue discussions are what this group is going to be focused on, but feel free to be perusing and maybe deciding on your own how you would think you'd fix that, and when that topic comes up, you can always just jump in for that topic. So that's it. I enjoyed getting to have our first little meeting, and I hope that we pull in more of the open community and people find this group to be useful.
So do you want me to put it on the calendar then for this time, 2 weeks from now?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
All right. Most of the work groups meet once a month, but we definitely don't have to be stuck with that. So I will put it on the calendar for March 5th. A lot of us will be.
No. We'll just wait for the month then.
Okay.
The next one, what I'd like to do is jump into more in-depth conversation about how the docs work, such as that tag releasing, the piping. There's a few different repos you pull in the docs from. So I guess that's going to be more on Sage and Bryce to talk about, if I remember correctly how this all cut up. And then I would like all of us to take on, except for Cassandra, all of us to take on a single tax issue, a small thing that we can do.
Will you just briefly show that board of the small issues really fast?
Yeah. So
it has a little bit of information on this agenda board. There's a code checker for missing documentation for modules that actually already has the PR that's open for that.
Right, I just listed it there in case that PR got rejected, or they're like, this needs to be reworked. Like, it's a great idea that we should just be aware of it until it's like accepted. So these are all the small ones that I've already gotten. Basically, the way that I've framed this is I didn't want our community kind of split and duplicating issues.
I think I share your screen still.
Yeah, so all issues are still being submitted to OpenSalt. The only thing I'm doing is creating an issue in this repository and then linking it and labeling like what it's about. This one's about a guide. It's a single solo issue, and it's to rework something on the docs because it doesn't make sense or whatever. And that's how I'd like to continue to keep it. That way nobody ever like comes to our repository, makes a real issue, and then somebody on OpenSalt makes the same issue again, and then everyone's frustrated. So all real documentation and all that all real issuing will be done still on OpenSalt. But yeah, so next month, Bryce and Sage, and then all of us will take our first tax item that is small and should only take any of us maybe an hour or two to do at most.
Dumb question. To claim an item, do you just assign it to yourself?
Sure, if you want to, that's fine.
I just wasn't sure how you claim it. That's all.
I wasn't sure if I was going to have to be a teacher where I was like, I've decided you're doing this homework today, or if everyone's like, I want that. So I wasn't sure. I hadn't divvied that out yet. Figured that out.
So you just want me to explain how things work in the next meeting, right?
Yes, that's right. Just more clarity, because I could tell from some of the conversation on the documentation Slack that there is we're inferring what's going on, but not 100% sure. And I was like, that might help stem off some unuseful conversation and make us more productive knowing how you guys do it.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's it. Let's call it a day and go back to real work.
Thanks, Alan.
All right. I'll see you.
Thanks.